welcome to everybody who's joined today. Good to see you all. I'm much looking forward to introducing Mark Ledger today, experienced fractional finance director, working with many owner-managed businesses on the topic selling and buying businesses, the journey. What we're going to do is at the end of the presentation have a Q&A session. We like to make these sessions as interactive as possible. So if you do have a question or you'd like to share your experience, please put that in the chat box, and then at the end I will introduce yourselves to present the questions to the group and to Mark, which hopefully we'll be able to share some really insightful advice. So to that end, I'd like to introduce Mark Ledger to you. All yours, Mark.
Thank you, Lois. Thank you, everybody, for taking time to come and listen to me drone on. I wanted to stress this is well, first of all, there's a presentation on the screen, just making sure everybody can see it. I'm sure there's going to be people on this call who've got bigger experience in certain areas than me, but as I'll talk about in a minute, over the last 18 months, it's been quite an unusual bout of activity. And when Lois asked me if I'd do a talk, I thought, well, what am I going to talk about that other people aren't really know anything about? And then I thought, well, this is an area probably I've got a bit of a unique experience because of the volume of transactions. So these are my personal comments. I'm not a professional corporate financier. I work as my experience. This is a bit background about me. So I've worked as a fractional CFO for about 25 years. Kind of one of the early adopters of that model. Pretty much all my clients are owner-managed businesses, sometimes multi-generation, but pretty much I'm dealing with the people who own the business, and as such, then I put on their typical size is 5 to 15 million turnover, employing 25 to 100 staff. And the point of this is pre-COVID, I might get involved in a transaction once every 3 years. That's just kind of the natural evolution of where my clients were going. Post-COVID, and particularly the Ukraine war, especially for those businesses that are operational style businesses, there's been a significant increase in people focusing on what their exit is, and which is good for me because part of my job with these people is Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I just had an unmute come up. It's persuading business owners that there needs to be some sort of plan as to where you're going with it, and I've got a lot more traction on that in the last couple of years, which is good in terms of trying to get something out of it. But in the last 18 months, I've been involved in about 12 transactions of different types, some of which are completed, some of which are aborted, some of which are ongoing. And what's happening is that everybody's seeing it. You'll get an email coming in from somebody saying, "Oh, I want to buy your business," and pre-COVID, people just delete it. People are more receptive to those emails, and those people sending those emails know people are more receptive. So there's far more interaction going on in those conversations than I noted before. And in many ways, I encourage people to do it, because if you talk to somebody who's sort of interested in your business, but you're not really interested in selling to them, you get an idea where your weaknesses are, and you can prepare for the time when you've got a call that you really do want to come to fruition. And it's like practicing for the job interview you don't want for the job interview you do want. Just to give you an idea, I have kept amounts out of this just from a sensitivity perspective, but just give you an idea of the range of deals I've been involved in some form or other. I had a couple of big clients where I'm part of a board that's going through multi-million-pound sales that are going out to the marketplace with full-blown investment memorandum and using international advisors. That's quite unusual because that's not my normal client base. I had a client sell significantly less than he would have done pre-COVID because he just had enough, just want to get out. And I'm seeing this a bit. People just had it, just want to go. I sold one business with a 5-year earn out. I've got another business, a little over £1 million that's starting due diligence. various sort of inquiries that have stopped. Other side of the coin, the biggest focus of this presentation more about from the seller perspective, because that's what I've done more of. Having said that, I've done a couple of purchases as well, so you can kind of see both sides of the fence in terms of what the process is. And also increasingly what I'm seeing is management buyouts or management buy-ins. So I've got 3 clients that their owners are in their late 40s, early 50s, have got a management team that could take over from them, give them some shares to start off with, have a plan for the company to buy the shares back. So that's an increasingly common approach. The biggest challenge there is actually finding a management team that can take over from you. That's the single biggest challenge I have in all my clients as well, is that next level of management from the owner who thinks like the owner. It's quite a challenge to find those people. Typically the buyers, I've seen an increasing number of, you've probably seen those groups, consolidation going on with firms, accountants and lawyers, professional firms, PE-backed money, creating these groups of, so under a branding of professional firms. But mostly my interaction, most of the deals that I'm dealing with are a trade sale where the potential purchaser and seller know each other from just being competitors, or they've been introduced. It's not going out to the marketplace completely cold with an investment memorandum looking for business. It's usually there's a connection somewhere, which makes the initial discussions a bit easier because it's kind of they know each other, it's a bit more informal. So friendly may not be the right word, but it's just a bit more informal. One of the big things to remember, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, is if you make your business as attractive as possible, you're going to get better value for it, particularly when you're getting profit multiples. So understanding where your weaknesses are and trying to address those before you get the real big one coming along, and always understanding that some improvements to the bottom line by a figure multiplies quite quickly depending on the profit multiple you're using. If you're going to go through an advisor, so I've got a couple of deals where we're basically paying as a broker, if you like, not an online broker, but one where they typically pay retainer and then get 5% of the sale proceeds. From that, you do a teaser, so it's like a 1 or 2 page document that has some information in, but not too much. And from that, you try and attract some attention. The advisor will hopefully do some vetting on the right people, and then you get into NDAs, and that's the point where you can start sharing information. The thing you want to do is make sure that you've done a bit of due diligence on the purchaser. So I've had situations where we found out the purchaser just didn't have the funds. They were exactly trying to kid us, but they just hadn't got the ability to go through with it as that stood. And if you've got a few people interested, you kind of want to go to the people who are most likely to be able to complete. The process when you've had a few discussions is create a heads of terms, memorandum of understanding, whatever word you want to call it, which again will be a few pages long. It will document the key points that both parties have agreed to. You sign to it. It's not a contractual document, but it helps the lawyer have a good understanding about what you're trying to achieve out of it, and hopefully smooth the process of the lawyer creating a share purchase agreement. And also, it's not uncommon that a buyer will ask for exclusivity. So if you get to a point where you've got a buyer who's really interested, you're interested in them, they'll ask for perhaps a 6-month exclusivity to do all their due diligence, so they know that they're not wasting their time, because this is going to be a costly process for the buyer, and they won't really waste their time. So that's completely dependent upon the seller as to whether they feel they got enough faith in the potential purchaser, or whether they're comfortable doing that. So it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens some of the time. Data library. So one of the things I'm always talking to my clients about, particularly now that more and more people are thinking about an exit, is create a data library. Because what happens, well, certainly my experience have in the friendly purchases, is that the potential purchaser will have a number of targets. And if they go to 3 targets and one of them comes up with information really quickly, they're kind of more likely to go down the road to that one. So having all the key components that you think the purchaser might need from you in terms of a data library, keep it up to date, means that somebody comes alongside an NDA, you can hand over straight away an electronic pack of all the key information, which, depending on your business, is going to be financial historical statements, management accounts, forecasts, client contracts, employee contracts, leases, property details, depending on what your business is. Some complex, some are not. But it speeds the process up, and it's a good discipline to do it, because it helps you. Does help you think about how you're set up and whether there are improvements you can make, which is never a bad thing. Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of thing, but normally evaluation starts off with a multiple of profits plus some agreement on how the net assets be calculated. Sometimes the buyers say they want any debt in the business, so they basically it's debt cash free. Personally, I'm all in favour of, unless there's anything dramatic in the business, just taking over the business as it stands, lock, stock and barrel, and going with it. Why do I really want to pay off debt and utilise cash when I can use that cash if I'm buying the business? So it does depend on the situation, and clearly there are factors that can influence the profit multiple. So positive things are recurring revenue. People love recurring revenue. So if you can show that you've got a good percentage of your revenues recurring on longish term contracts, all that will help. A good spread of customers. So I've got a couple of my clients that have a big dominance on one customer. That's going to weaken their position with a potential purchaser, likely. Whether you've got IP, so I've noted down the bottom, I've got a client that we sold for a good sum of money that were in financial problems, but they had tech, and the purchaser wanted the tech, so they decided that the cost that it was going to be to them to build the tech was more than what they're going to buy the company for. But you could never have predicted that. Came out of the blue. You sat down and did the profit valuation of that business. You would have come up with not a very big figure. So I found that most of the deals are done. You start off with the multiple profits and evaluation of net assets. That isn't the price you end up with. There's always things that affect it. Management team is obviously a big part of it, and reliance or otherwise on the owner. So another subject I have with all my clients is, can you get to a point where you can go away for a month on holiday and the business runs fine? Because that would be attractive for a purchaser. That particularly if you're somebody who wants to get out relatively quickly, if you can prove the business isn't reliant upon you, you'll get a better multiple and more money up front. Yeah, and if you are somebody who just says, right, I'm gonna sell and go, and I want my money up front, you're going to get a smaller figure than if you prepare to stay with the purchaser for a few years with a staged payment. The thing I found with earnouts is this is a general comment, but the longer the period of time you earn out, then the increasing amount of likelihood the owner's not going to hang around. Anybody who's run a business on their own for quite a few years won't be used to reporting to somebody else. Be okay maybe for the first 6 months, but often it starts to have problems, and sometimes just people walk away from the earnout and figure, I've had enough, I'll go. Which obviously from the purchaser's point of view, they try and get it to a point where they haven't paid the seller a sum of money that's sufficient for them to go. They need to have skin in the game. And another thing I've come across a couple of times recently is structuring for what was entrepreneur's relief. So it depends on the value you're selling it for. But if you sell your shares in stages, it may be more difficult to maximize business asset disposal relief. Sometimes I've seen the seller has basically sold all their shares, and they've had installment payments over the next 2 to 4 years. There's obviously a bit of a risk because you're there's no guarantee the company is going to be around, although hopefully you'll think the purchasing company will give some sort of guarantee. But in order to maximise your tax relief from that, you need to sell the shares all at one go. Next stage will be the share purchase agreement. So the ideal is that you've ironed out all the basic terms with the two parties. You've got a heads of agreement everybody's happy with. Then you go to the lawyers, which is this sort of bit that's always the painful bit. And sometimes, particularly people who are inexperienced at this actually get turned off by it and say, I can't deal with this, it's just too much. And it can be an expensive process. So what you'll find, you'll go to a lawyer, average deal, he'll come back with a 150 odd page SBA. You think, oh God, fair bit of that can be whittled down, but you're always going to end up with a pretty extensive document. What I try and do is get usually the buyer does the share purchase agreement. I try and get the seller's lawyer to give their first review of it, and then try and get as many of those answered between the seller and buyer and the people within the business as possible, so that then you go back to a lawyer with a good chunk of their answers. I discourage lawyers from having extensive email conversations. That's where the money can rack up. Warranties is the biggest element of the SPA. That if anything is going to go wrong, it's in this area. A buyer is obviously going to ask for everything you can think of warranties. The seller wants the minimum warranties, and this is where I have known somebody to walk away from it. They just didn't want to sign up to the warranties that was being asked for. So in the last couple of transactions I've done, which is heading towards sort of due diligence, I've got the seller to actually look at a sample agreement to see what typically is being asked and make sure that they have settled themselves on the kind of questions they're going to be asked to cover, rather than get too far down the road and find that it freaks them out. So I found that's been quite a useful process of just getting the head in the right place of what they're going to have to go through. And on bigger deals, it's also very intensive. The few weeks leading up to completion is virtually exclusively working on the deal, and it can be disruptive in the business. The next bit, so assuming the SBA has been agreed, funds are in place, everything's happy, the last thing you'll have to do is fill in a disclosure statement in. And this is where a seller is recommended to declare every possible thing you can think of. Because if you don't put something in there that you think it might be some communication you've had from a customer, something about your product, or just anything that you kind of might have some concern by, if you declare it, then it can't be held against you in the future. So if you know a customer who says maybe going through an acquisition, and maybe they're acquiring a competitor of you and won't be using your services, well, that kind of thing you need to be telling the purchaser. So it's got to give that one a lot of thought. Fees, it's a painful bit. Obviously depends on each deal. Obviously depends on the size. The two deals going through that I'm on the edge of that are multi-million. They're going to end up paying 800,000 to their advisors. And the thing at the bottom you need to remember: if you're the seller, you are personally liable for those fees, not the company. Can be a little bit of those fees can be routed through the company. So therefore, it's the fees plus VAT, and that's something you've got to consider. Because if it fails, then you'll have abort fees, and you can end up with quite a big personal professional fees bill that you've then got to presumably pay dividends out of your business and pay tax on, and the whole consequences of that. But I would say a typical 1 to 2 million, small business being bought by a slightly larger business. The purchasers will pay about 25k to lawyers and about 8k to accountants. It does depend on the tax advice. The seller would like to pay 6k to lawyers and about 2k to accountants. That kind of scale. I've done a recent one that is you wouldn't believe how simple it was in terms of the size of the company. The two parties are working together. It was an integration to business. I couldn't get any more simple, and it still cost me 15,000 in legal fees. It's frustrating, but the process is such that you can't really get away from that. So it's anybody, your client's going to go through this process, they do need to be aware of what the cost is going to be, and the potential personal element if it fails. Other points that I sort of thought of in the process are very difficult to hide from the management team, particularly when it gets near the time that the sellers will be out of circulation quite a lot. So ideally, you lock your key management team in. Now you'd think ideally the purchasers want the management team in place. So they ought to be cooperative with that. But there could be some instances where the purchasers just buying the customer base and they're going to strip all the overheads out because they've got the team already. Don't need the people. So having your key management team who probably will need them in the process of collating information, them having some skin in the game through bonuses or share options, ideally share options, is a really good idea. And I do try and get that situation set up with anybody I'm working for, that they ideally have EMI share option scheme. And it take a lot of time with a lot of the owners' time to do this. And the other thing that increasingly common are employee ownership trusts. So it is a very tax efficient way for a owner of a business to exit the business. Typically, though, it needs to be a business where the owner's made a fair bit of money already. They're comfortable, don't need the money straight away, because generally it takes quite a long time for the management team to generate the profit sufficient to pay off the previous owner. The downside to it is that the owner relinquishes control of the business. That's not always comfortable with them. You need to make sure you've got a decent management team who are going to be able to generate the profits. But the thing I found recently in a instance is that the banks do not like EOTs. So if you're raising money to buy an EOT, you may have some problems with the banks not really want to get involved in it, and they're expensive to set up. I think it can be varying, still can be 20 to 25,000 to set up. So I've been aware of a few people who've been approached to say, "Oh, you can sell your business for no tax," which obviously sounds very attracting, without telling them what it costs to actually set up in the first place, and the fact they lose control of the business. So that's me gone through that fairly quickly. I tried to think of all the key areas in the process. Obviously, every situation is slightly different, but I'm happy to take any questions if anybody's got anything they'd like to ask more, or even share some experiences.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Mark. Yeah, we've got some questions and comments in the chat box. So if we could go perhaps to Alistair Howard first, please. Alistair, would you like to go ahead and present your comment or question?
Yeah, hi, Mark. Thank you very much. Really useful. I'm FD at a business law firm, and we do a lot of M&A type activity. And your comment about get some heads signed and then give it to the lawyers, I actually will disagree with. We had a recent example of a client we act for quite a bit, and they prepared their own heads. They drafted it on, I think, ChatGPT, and it was a pile of, well, it wasn't fit for purpose. It actually ended up costing them more for us to renegotiate things like the warranties, the indemnities, etc., than it would have cost in the first place if we'd been engaged in the heads. So my comment would tend to be that anyone buying or selling should engage their professional providers at the earliest opportunity, not further down the line. And you may say, well, you'll say that, Al, because you're a law firm and you want the fees. Not necessarily how it's driven. It's about making sure the clients, whether you're buying or selling, get the correct advice at the outset. And if they're selling, they give as few warranties as possible. If they're buying, they get as many as they possibly can do. So it's getting the right team on board at the outset, not maybe trying to save a couple of grand initially.
Yeah, apologies, I didn't say that, but I do run that through my lawyer before we sign off. So
Right.
the two parties put down all the information, all the sort of the terms, I think, but then I will get some advice on at that point as to whether the lawyer that we're going to use sees any issues. So I do agree.
Fine. I mean,
do agree with that.
Obviously need to agree what they're buying and selling, but I think the legal drafting of that is key. But most informative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Alistair. John Elder, I think you have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had any insights on the best way to go about strengthening management teams pre-sale. I mean, I've got a sort of live scenario at the moment where the day-to-day management team are quite good, and use the example of the founder going away for a month. In fact, they've done that very recently and no issues. But do they have the skill set to drive the business forward strategically? I'd say no, they don't. So we're looking at ways of trying to address that before we move into a sales process in 2 or 3 years' time. And we've looked around for suitable people to join the team, and it is very, very difficult.
I completely agree. It is very difficult. Is actually the answer to your question, but clearly the obvious things are you're identifying where the weaknesses are in the skill sets. And if there is a plan to sell, you can actually go and get somebody. You can go get somebody specifically in to take you in that journey from now to when you sell. So it might be somebody who's done it before. So it's not necessarily somebody who'll stay afterwards, but has got the ability to strengthen the business. And a lot of it depends also on your acquirer. So if you've got an idea about who might be buying you, you'll have an idea about what their current setup is to understand where they may see weaknesses. But I agree with you, and I said in my commentary, it is one of the biggest challenges pretty much all my clients have got, is finding those people who step up and be the next business owner. And it's the most common discussion that I'm having with them.
Yeah. I mean, we find it particularly difficult out of London to find the right people. I mean, I don't know if that's
what business sector you're in.
It's food technology.
Okay.
But we've got plenty of technical ability within the business. It's people to drive. There's lots of opportunity in new markets, and it's being able to drive those opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, we're almost in a view of like, would it actually be easier to sell the business to somebody who recognises that's a weakness, who actually has that skill set?
Yes. And that's where
we'd retain a big share in the business going forward.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I mean, that's why earn-outs are there, aren't they? Because it's rare that the business is completely set up, perfect, pick it up and run with it. There's always going to be some uncertainties, and the earn-out helps remove that uncertainty by, the next 3 years you carry on making the profits that we're buying you for, then yes, you can have your money, because we will have that time to sort it out. But each deal is slightly different. But yeah, looking at your senior management team is a hugely important part of the process.
Yeah, and I suppose I've got a follow-on question, which I put on, which does follow on from this, is are there private or institutional investors, which I assume would probably be private equity firms, that specialise or are willing to consider partial buyouts in the short term with strategic goals to be delivered, and then move on to a full buyout in due course?
I would say that is the PE model. So I've one of the ones that I refer to in here have done that they sold 40% to a PE company with the classic model of throwing a load of money in for marketing and then sell. They got sideswiped by COVID slightly, but that's the route they're on. So to me, that is a classic PE process of take some money off the table, but not enough and leave enough on it for the owners to be still motivated to sell.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're looking at sort of a sales process starting in 3 to 5 years' time, actually beginning now to court potential private equity firms is a good idea.
Yes, you would need to know what their sweet spot is. So often they'll say if it's less than $1 million EBITDA, not interested. So you
we'll be between 5 and 10 by then. So
good. Then you've got So yes, going out there, doing some research on who the right people. What I would say with PE, if PE is your route, is my relatively limited experience of it was it's a lot of internal communication required with a PE firm. So almost like I was almost exclusively managing the relationship with the PE firm.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not for everybody, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it'll be okay for us though. But thank you.
Okay.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Victoria, I think you had something you'd like to contribute.
Yeah, I was just, well, it was general for the group, the other one, but I have a specific question, which is actually, so my contribution was more about how, like, for me, when I'm working with a new business or a new client as a fractional CFO, I start every assignment with a discovery project. And again, I've been in this space for some years, and my discovery project is done through an exit lens, whether or not they're looking to exit, be that sell, do an employee, a management buyout or anything like that. So that basically through that discovery, what I'm doing is highlighting at that point the areas of the business basically where they can kind of focus on to create and maximize value and build their business and develop their business through an exit lens, so that when a transaction or something does appear, then actually it's not costly and ultimately they maximize their value. So that was just a note for people, and I'm welcome if anyone has any questions after that and they want to share anything, again, please introduce me. But my question I had specifically for Mark was around your experience with using CF advisors with SMEs and like the pluses and the minuses, because I've had mixed experience, and you know, I'm very mindful that that can be very costly. And what I've often seen is obviously them coming in and the first thing is they want to, you know, start working on IMs and decks and all sorts of things, which can be a cost before we've even got anywhere. And I just welcome thoughts on like your experience with using them and when you think it's right to do and not.
Most of my experience has not been using them, but the experience, the small amount of experience I've got of using them is, well, I think there was confusion. I can think of one confusion of who was actually preparing the IM. I think the client thought they were, and the corporate finance thought the client was. So that threw them slightly, but. I think I can't. It's a bit of a caveat because the two ones I talk about haven't gone that far down the road for me to say give you the pros and cons. But yes, it is an expensive process. But I guess you have to think, well, what am I getting out of it net? Is that a satisfactory amount? And you're going to have to put aside the overall cost because it's a means to an end.
Yeah, I'm in a situation at the moment and it's like, you know, we're definitely on a plan, you know, it's 2 years from now, but I have a non-exec who has worked with SMEs, albeit I've not worked with him before, that's joined the board, and he's trying to convince an owner about like, let's start spending with corporate advisors straight away. And I'm kind of got this kind of battle whereby, you know, the business has got a very strong in-house finance function. I'm fractional with them. You know, our data room is ready almost now for anyone to look at us. Not that we're looking to do anything. And we've got a lot of confidence internally in doing what I call our first draft of an IM. So I'm kind of pushing against it. And he's kind of coming, I think, from you just have to do to maximize your value. And we're having a very kind of, you know, healthy professional debate over it. And it's just one of those where I think maybe perhaps in his experience, he's been working with businesses that maybe haven't had people with the experience of where this business is at. So it's just kind of hearing other views, I think, is always really welcome.
Yeah, I think I'd be say who's the likely target audience to buy you. If you've got a pretty good idea who they are and how they operate and what they're after, I will kind of side with you. If it's really going out into an open marketplace and you need your corporate advisor to find those people for you, then you kind of need to rely upon them that they know how they should present the data and what it should look like. So I would probably have something of a conversation not too far down the road with somebody like that to see if they feel you're positioning yourself right.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Curve, did you have a question?
Hi. Thanks, Louise. Hi, Mark. Wonderful presentation. I'm quite new to all this. I'm working on one transaction where the sellers have asked for the stock to be paid separately, and I think you mentioned net assets to be valued separately. So my question was, is this a standard practice? Because I thought when you value a business, you're valuing for the entire business with all its balance sheet.
You said paid for and valued separately. That's two separate things. So what are you suggesting they want to?
They want to value with a multiple
transaction?
plus have another extra for the stock.
What about the rest? How are they dealing with the rest of the net assets of the business then?
They're saying that will be covered under the valuation. So whatever EBITDA multiple that we agree on, but they want an added price for the stock, which seemed a bit strange to me.
Well, I guess you have to think if they're buying. I presume that means stock is a significant part of their balance sheet. So
yes,
probably
it's a manufacturing business. Yeah.
Probably what they're saying is if you remove stock from the balance sheet, the rest of your assets and liabilities probably don't add up to much.
Yeah.
So therefore,
correct.
There is not a need to sort of value it separately. So I mean, I'll give a classic example of farmers. So farmers are the classic asset-rich, cash-poor. So if you're a farming client, you're not going to value your business on profits and multiple because your assets are huge usually compared to actual profits. So it does depend on what the value of the net assets are. So I'm guessing they're saying that the stock is the most valuable part of that, and they want that recognised separately. But as I said earlier on, the price of a business is based on a willing buyer, willing seller. If that's what the seller wants, and he can put some rationale for it, it's up for the purchaser to decide whether they think that's the right idea or not. But I can sort of see the logic of it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. James Strange-Francis, I think you have a question.
Yeah, hi. As on the screen, so I'm keen to know why banks would have issues lending to EOTs. I can see that the security might be thin, and recourse wouldn't be great. But I'd be keen to know your specific knowledge as we're looking at a few of these right now.
It's the regulatory nature of it, and I'm making that comment from one example of two banks, one transaction of which two banks made the comment. And it just seems uncomfortable. So what they said to me, we need you to get clearance from HMRC that it's been set up right. I don't believe we'd ever be able to do that. I'd have to go to maybe a recognised firm of accountants to get them to review it.
Yeah. Well, the rules have been tightened, so that is clearly a requirement now.
Post yes. So in the last budget, there were things put in place to make that tighter, so that the former owner doesn't act like the current owner, which I think is a part of the concern. So it just made it an extra hurdle that I hadn't anticipated when I had the conversation, and made me think need to be aware of that. That if you have an EOT and you're looking to sell it, it just may be more difficult.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's good to know it's that level that you're sort of looking at. I mean, obviously, some companies where an EOT works have surplus capital, so they can fund it from outset. They wouldn't need to gear up in order to make it work because they start with net cash on the balance sheet.
So my comment comes from looking to buy an EOT company.
Right. So
I'm the acquirer looking to raise money to buy an EOT. That's where there was a concern addressed by the banks.
Okay, so that's a company where an EOT happened some time ago.
Yes.
And it hasn't been paid out yet.
That is true. Yes. Although I'm not sure.
So it's just it's quite a sort of niche case. Okay. Thanks, Mark. Cheers.
Thank you. I think Lack, did you have a comment with regards to that?
Yes, I mean, I've been involved in an EOT recently, and as it happened, the business had enough profits to pay the founder. But I have come across some lenders who specialise in funding for EOTs, and there's one organisation called Skipton, and they actively promote lending for EOTs. So maybe you have to go to some of these specialist lenders.
I think yes, I would agree. I'm sure there's people out there. It was kind of one of these just regular bank meetings about, we're thinking of doing this. Would you be interested in funding it? And that was the reaction I got. But we found another route.
That's very helpful, Lack. Thank you.
Thank you. Darren, did you have a question?
Hi. Yeah. I mean, I guess, as you say, the value of a business, what somebody's willing to sell for and somebody's willing to buy for. But I'm assuming you're generally asked for your view. Again, kind of had experience of, well, what multiple should we use? What's kind of the market now? Is it 4 times EBIT, 5 times EBITDA? Look at your balance sheet, look at your assets. If you kind of getting that question, or you just kind of leave them to it in the room and go, well, when you come up with a price, I'll start kicking in.
No, it's yes, it's an early stage part of it, and picking up. I think Victoria mentioned the comment about when she goes in and does initial valuation, initial assessment of the business. I do the same, and it's quite useful to actually value the business on that day, and you can use that template going forward to demonstrate increase in businesses. But also picking up the other point somebody made about corporate finance teams, corporate finance advisor. That's actually where they have some use, because they've got access to deals in a similar sector that I wouldn't have. So establishing what the multiple is for that industry is very useful to have some empirical evidence of other deals that have gone through in that way that are comparable to your client. But absolutely, yes, I get involved in seeing what we think the valuation would be based on what we know about the business, doing the usual adjusted EBITDA. Most owner-managed businesses have expenses going through that wouldn't repeat with a new purchaser. So making sure you're pitching it properly by showing an adjusted EBITDA is an important part of it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, the last one that we done, kind of the owner had an idea in his head of what value he wanted, and it was a friendly kind of sale, and just so happens that the buyers went, we're considering this price. He was really trying to hold back his smirk on his face that it actually comes to exactly the same number. So it just worked really well. But got to be some, as you said, some kind of market depending on the business as to generally where the multiples are, and some people again have different views on what they're taking. As I say, whether it's EBIT or EBITDA before they even start multiplying. So, or again, as you said, looking at the balance sheet and go for net assets. So, okay, no, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Ashish, I think you had a question.
Hi there, yeah, great presentation, Mark. So I've got a company, I've got a client who's looking to purchase a company, and I had a few questions. Number one is, do you think the evaluation should be different if the purchase deal is structured, part shares, part cash, as opposed to pure share purchase?
Probably. I'm hesitating because every deal's different. But the more you can defer cash going out in whatever format, the greater value you can justify putting upon it. So the thing is, one extreme, you're going to walk out the door the day after, you're going to get a lot less money than if you hang around for 5 years. And hanging around for 5 years, which includes some shares in the acquiring company, it doesn't. Not so much cash is going out. So I believe it. I would say that it would affect the price, but every situation is so difficult. It's kind of difficult to be specific about it. But I would kind of agree with you.
Yeah, so so what you're saying is, if it's a part cash, part shares, that would be kind of a low. So as a person, you pay less as opposed to pure share, where they're kind of pot might be bigger later on, isn't it? Especially as a combined company, you might see the valuation increasing, and they will get a better value later on. So you pay less on a pure shares purchase.
The big question there is understanding what the value of the shares could be. So there's a risk associated with that. It could be worthless. There could be a lot. So I think if we, I was just going to refer somebody well known, but I thought I won't do that. But it's an unknown, and I think if it's a good thing for the purchaser to have the seller take some shares in the business, because clearly they then have they've got commitment to the whole project. And so you can add a greater value to that than you can if somebody's just going to walk away with cash.
Great, thank you. And the other question I had is, as I said, we're trying to acquire a company. It's kind of a very early stage company. I think the two CEOs have come to almost like a valuation between them. So my question is, what kind of advisors do you think, besides the legal, which is necessary, you've got the legal advisors. Are there any advisors you would kind of utilize, or would you as a CFO just get the rest of the due diligence done yourself?
I've never put myself forward as any particular expert, particularly when it comes to tax. So I would get a decently resourced local firm of accountants, regional size, to make sure you've got the tax advice element on it, and any sort of financial inputs they've got into it. So for average sale of a couple of £1 million, then you'll find that those kind of accountants usually have a pretty good department. So it's not full on corporate finance, because you're not using them to go out and sell the deal. You've got the deal. You need advice, but they will have a department that's experienced in doing that. So they would give valuable advice. So when I spoke about fees, that's why the accountant's fees are usually less than the lawyer's fees, because the lawyer's is more involved. You get a good corporate lawyer, then they'll be very experienced, and if they're on your side, then they will pick up a lot of things and help you on the way. But from a pure financial stroke tax, you need accountants to be complementary to them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark.
And at one point, I just remember, was that talking about what the price of the business is. So I've often had this discussion with my clients. I just said, look, what's the check? If I give you a check today, what is it you're going to want to walk away with? Forget about the thoughts on valuation of multiple profits or net assets. What is that figure? And when you get out of them what they think they want, you can then work backwards and say, right, how far away are we from that today? And then you can start to work with them to put the plans in place to get them to that point. Maybe they're already, but usually they're not. That does help with their strategic planning, because you'll focus their mind on, this is the figure I want. I'm short of it. What have I got to do to get to that point? It just gets more engagement from them on the process.
So most of my clients, because I work in technology, the first question I ask is, when do you want to exit the business? Or is this a lifestyle business? So it's a question of, I want out in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years, and then you kind of work backwards. So in my mind, I'm always getting them ready for a sale or some sort of an exit.
Yeah.
And then I think the conversation you had with Victoria or one or some later on is quite important. When do you get corporate advisors involved? And I think it's quite useful to get them involved when you're kind of ready to sell, because I feel like like the point you made, in certain industries, they have the knowledge. And I think if you get, 1 or 2 times better valuation because of using corporate advisors, I think their fees are worth it. So for me and our perspective, just getting that valuation as high as possible. And how can we get you the maximum exit?
Yes. So, really, you're paying the corporate advisors to ramp up that multiple. That's how effectively how they earn their money.
Exactly. Great. Thank you.
And you're going back to your point about tech companies. I think businesses, it's not right or wrong to say I'm on a succession route, I'm an exit route, a management buyout route for lifestyle, but you just need to know what you think their preferred route is. But whichever it is, you still need to set the business up so that you've got the opportunity to sell it if and when something comes along, because they'll change their mind if they're big enough checks put in that way. So going through all the disciplines we've been talking about is important, no matter which road they think they're going down.
I think especially true in the smaller company, because none of them are ready. If they've never had a CFO, they're never ready. It's amazing. Sometimes they don't have basic monthly management accounts. So I think you're right. I think that's my attitude: is walk into a business and just get them ready for a sell.
Yes.
Even if it means preparing a data room and you're going to use it, then it's better to be prepared if something comes up, because you never know. Things like, I think you mentioned, if COVID happens or something else happens and people want to get out, then it's better to be ready right now.
Yep, I agree.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I think there's one last one in the chat box. I think Jan, you commented on something that John said earlier. Did you want to share that?
Well, I think he was saying he was struggling to find skills, and I was suggesting he try to recruit across outside London or remote in London. I think he was saying he was struggling to find skills outside London, so maybe he could try to recruit remotely or across sectors as well if he's struggling for skills. That was just my comment. And I'm doing interim finance across various parts in finance, operational efficiency, and also very keen on mergers and acquisitions. I thought I would put that comment out. There's a lot of sectors are struggling for skills generally, and that could be a way to kind of look away from conventional hiring and thinking in mergers and acquisition as well, particularly in private equity. There tends to be this hiring within connections. Maybe look outside as well. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. I think that's everybody we've addressed it in the chat box. There were several messages, Mark, from people that had to leave saying thank you and really valued your presentation. So I'd like to add to that. Thank you very much for your time in preparing the presentation and yes, answering people's questions, etc. Thank you.
No worries. Thank people for attending.
Yes, thank you all for attending. Christiane will actually be sending out a follow-up email. And I suppose the thing I wanted to let everybody know about, which I always do, is the platform Eugenie that FD Recruiter set up, and it's for FDs and CFOs, and these discussions quite often carry on that platform, and it's an area that you can use that network to pose any other questions or share experience. So it's a good networking tool, and details of that will be in the email that Christiane sends out. I think this session has been recorded, so if anybody does want a recording, please let Christiane know in that email that she's going to send out. So yeah, just once again, thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for everybody attending. And hopefully we'll see you towards the end of April for the next one, details of which will be on the FD events page.